Welcome to the Paradigm Shifting Podcast. I'm your host, Binky Bell, and I use this platform to simply share my insight and opinions on topics like motherhood, marriage, and self-improvement. I talk about these topics through the filter of my own experiences, and while I'm not a coach or a leader of any significance, I do hope that some of what I talk about resonates with you and helps you in your expression of modern motherhood. At the Paradigm Shifting Podcast, I'll always advocate that we shed these paradigms that don't serve us, stay growth focused, and above all, just be your own guru. If you enjoy the work I do, I just ask that you share it, maybe like and subscribe. Doing these things helps push my content out so that it can be found more easily by women like us who are on a path of self-improvement. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Paradigm Shifting Podcast. My name is Binky Bell and I'm so glad you're here. So today I want to talk about losing your cool in parenting. It's super common, it happens all the time, yet we tend to beat ourselves up about it. We spend a lot of time wallowing in guilt and shame whenever it happens. So today I'm going to give you 3 questions to ask yourself whenever you lose your cool with your children. We're going to go over what it could mean when you lose your cool. We're going to go over what it definitely does not mean when you lose your cool. And at the end of everything, I'm going to give you some insight as to what I think you should maybe do after you have an episode where you lose your cool with your children. So at the end of it all, I hope you have a few little takeaways that'll help you on your motherhood journey. Let's get into it. I chose this topic to go over because, like I said, it's a huge source of shame and guilt for a lot of women. So we lose our cool, feel guilty, feel ashamed about it. We beat ourselves up, talking about what terrible mothers we are. Then we carry that feeling with us. It affects our mood, it affects the ways in which we engage with our children. So we inevitably lose our cool again. And then it just confirms the feelings that we were feeling, that I'm a terrible mother and I have a reason to feel ashamed and guilty. So shame and guilt come up a lot in women's circles and parenting groups, and they're used interchangeably, but I do think that there's a little bit of a difference. I think that guilt is associated with what you do. You feel guilty about something that you did or said. Shame is it's a much more deeply rooted weed, right? Shame is associated with who you are at your core as a person. So it's much harder to separate the feeling of shame from the person. So today, what I would like to do is help you reframe how you think of losing your cool, how you feel about it whenever it happens. When you lose your cool with your children, it does not mean that you're a terrible mother. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you're raising bad kids, right? It doesn't mean you failed, and it doesn't mean you need to beat yourself up over it for days on end. What it could mean, though, when you lose your cool, when you lose control of your emotions, maybe you yell at your children, maybe you threw a toy, whatever it is, whenever you lose your cool with your children, it could mean a lot of things. It could mean maybe you're overstimulated. Maybe you're not practicing the right type of self-care. You're not taking care of yourself. That's going to shorten your fuse. It's going to affect your mood. Maybe you're hungry. Maybe you're anxious. Maybe you're just touched out. Maybe you're not sleeping. Maybe your nutrition is lacking. There's a lot of things that it could mean. None of them are a reflection of who you are as a person. So that brings me to the first question that I think we should ask ourselves whenever we lose our cool with our children. What am I really, really feeling? What's really going on? Now, sometimes some of us will be hearing this and will be thinking, I lose my cool all the time and I never know why. It just bleh. It explodes out of me and I don't know why. If you can't figure out the root cause just yet, that's fine. Don't beat yourself up about that either, okay? These questions that I'm going to give you, these 3 questions, are to help bring about a little bit higher level of self-awareness for you so you can start kind of unraveling these things. So like I said, the first question is, what am I really feeling? Because the most important lesson that I've learned personally about emotions is that anger is not an emotion that exists alone. And I'm going to pause for a second and we're going to say that again because it's that important. Anger does not exist alone. Anger shows up to fight the fights of other more vulnerable emotions that we have a hard time accessing. Anger can show up when we're scared. We're scared of how a situation is going to make us look, so we get angry. Anger shows up to cover up disappointment or frustration, any other emotion. Typically, anger shows up to cover for that emotion. So that's why the first question that I think we should ask ourselves is, what am I really, really feeling? Because the thing about anger is that it's a reaction. It's reactionary. It's quick, and it happens so quick, and it can happen so often that we begin to believe, I can't help it. You know, that's what we say. These kids just make me so crazy, and I end up screaming, I can't help it. And that's because anger is a reaction. A response is something that you do after you take a pause. But if you can train yourself to start sitting with these feelings, and if you can, commit to start really doing this internal work to figure out what's really going on inside of you, that's going to give you a deeper level of self-awareness. And that self-awareness that you gain is going to give you the ability in the future to take that pause, because you're going to be more tuned in with yourself. You're going to recognize the signs that you're approaching anger, that you're feeling a little bit off, that you're not honoring your natural rhythm. And that pause is really what makes the difference between exploding in anger and taking a break and responding in an appropriate manner with your children. So most of us weren't taught how to do that. Most of us weren't taught to take a pause in anger whenever we feel anger. So what we're having to do now as adults is realize that we're reacting from some default programming. Maybe your dad was a yeller, maybe your mom threw dishes. All of these things we just absorbed and learned, and now we're having to undo everything that we learned, everything that was taught to us by example. But it's really, really, really important work. It's important to sit down and figure out why certain behaviors from our children trigger this large response from us. Once you start sitting down and kind of digging around inside your psyche and your memories and stuff, you uncover a lot of things about your own childhood, about your relationship with your own parents. And sometimes it can be a little bit icky, but the reward is that you're more in command of yourself. And you're going to start responding better to your children. You're going to start building a stronger relationship with them. And literally everything is going to improve from there. So, second question. Maybe you dug around a little bit and you figured out what the root cause of your reaction was. Once you identify that feeling, maybe it's a fear, maybe you're worried about what would happen if you didn't respond in anger. If I don't yell at them, maybe they're just going to stay wild and screaming and acting crazy, whatever the situation is. The second question is, how can I honor this feeling? And again, this is something that we were not taught growing up. If you were, then you can just exit out of the video because you're probably way better at this than me. But I know that most adults were not taught what it means to honor your feelings. So growing up, most of us were taught, when it comes to emotions, to do one of two things. One, we shut them down and ignore them completely. We don't even acknowledge them. Or two, a lot of us were taught to sit deeply in the emotions, to wrap them around us and wear them like a cozy blanket. We just sit and stew in heavy, heavy emotions, and we stay there. Again, this is something that I talk about a lot, this concept of like sitting and wearing your emotions for a long time, because it comes up in a lot of women's groups, because women are more emotional. We just are. We are. And there's so many benefits to that serve us so well, but somewhere along the line we have taken that to mean that our feelings matter a whole lot. We've almost got an unhealthy attachment to our emotions whenever we feel them. We feel something icky like guilt or shame, and sometimes we we pick it like a scab, like that kind of hurts so good kind of feeling. So we feel guilty about something, and then we start thinking of all the reasons why that guilt should be confirmed. You know, you start thinking about the time that you yelled at your kid during Christmas, and then the time that you made your kid cry at the birthday party, and oh my God, like, of course I'm a terrible mother. We pile it on ourselves so we can keep feeling that feeling, and it's almost addictive. But that's why the second question is so important. What does it mean to honor a feeling, to truly honor an emotion? You know, what are we supposed to do to honor an emotion if it doesn't mean just venting it and wallowing in it? So to honor your emotions is really just to acknowledge it, give it a name, recognize it, see that it's there, feel it, and then let it pass. You don't have to do anything with it. You don't have to react. You don't have to sit and wallow. You don't have to vent and project it out onto other people so that you can keep reliving the emotion. Just acknowledge it, name it, feel it, and let it pass. Again, kind of hard to do, takes a little bit of practice, but possible. See, I kind of think of these emotions a little bit like a stream. Like if you picture yourself standing in or near a stream and you start to see frustration coming down the stream, maybe you go into the stream and you stand there and you watch it come. And once it gets to you and you feel it, you can sit down in it. And when you sit in that feeling, all the frustration is going to wash up on you. You're going to feel a lot of resistance in that stream, in that water. It's going to make it harder to stand up and move on out of it, right? But if we can see that frustration coming down this imaginary stream, maybe we're standing in there and the water's up to our ankles, maybe even our shins, we're going to feel it, a little bit of resistance. We're going to acknowledge it, but it's going to pass much more quickly. We don't have to sit and let it wash over us and drown us and tie us down, right? Like you can literally just let it glide past you. You'll feel it, acknowledge it, and then just let it go. That's the best way to honor a feeling, is just acknowledge it. Give it a name, identify it, and let it go. So the third question then would be, how can I prevent this next time? How can I prevent it next time? So we've identified what we're really feeling. We acknowledged that feeling. We know that we can just let it pass, but we know that we're going to lose our cool again. So is there something that we can do to prevent this explosive show of anger? Can we prevent it? The first thing that I always recommend to people is to look for a pattern. This isn't going to apply to everybody in every situation, but often we can identify patterns in our anger. Sometimes that pattern is directly related to where we are in our menstrual cycle. And for whatever reason, a lot of women have a hard time admitting to themselves or to anybody else that we suffer from PMS. Like it got turned into such a huge stereotype as a way for people to invalidate what we're feeling. But it's a real thing. Your hormones, especially if they're wildly imbalanced, will affect the ways in which you respond to negative emotions. Maybe your pattern is something as simple as stressful breakfast times. Maybe you need to meal plan. Maybe you need to put your clothes out in the morning. Maybe you need to have the children's backpacks ready. I don't know what it is. But sometimes we can identify patterns in our anger where we're losing our cool, and we can problem solve for that specific time. And what's going to happen is that's going to be one less area in our life, one less time where we lose our cool with our children. And from that, we can build momentum off of that. That's one stressful situation that can be eliminated. And doing that, each time we do that, we lengthen our fuse a little bit, right? We're not so burned out. Our fuse isn't so short all the time, and everything will just get better from there. It's really, really neat stuff to do. I've done it in multiple areas of my life, and I mean, it just gets better. It's really easy, but it takes a level of accountability, responsibility. We got to start taking action. We can't just sit and think and feel all the time. It has to be followed with some action. So now I want to talk about what you should do after you lose your cool with your children. But first, I want to be really clear about the fact that this episode is not designed to give you a 3-step process on how to never lose control of your emotions with your kids. That's insane. Like it's not possible. You're going to lose your shit on your kids. You're going to. This is just designed to give you some tools, to give you some space between each incident. The goal is never to be perfect. It's just to make a little bit of progress in these areas, okay? Because even if I had a system that would make it so that you never lost your cool with your kids, never lost control of your emotions, you wouldn't want that. You wouldn't want that for your kids. It would be a terrible idea. Here's why. Now, I'm not advocating that being a total psycho is good for your kids, okay? But when we lose our cool with our children, there are lessons to be learned in that. Sometimes the lesson is that mom has a limit to what she will tolerate from your behavior. Sometimes that's the lesson. It happens. Again, not advocating that you be a total psycho with your kids, but the much more important lesson that we're teaching our kids is after we screw up, whenever we lose our cool with them, what's more important than never losing your cool is how you handle it afterwards. Because what should happen after you lose your cool, ideally, is that you sit down and you apologize to them. And what this gives them, it gives them a few things. It teaches them a few lessons. It shows them that you are imperfect. It shows them that it's okay to be imperfect, that nobody's perfect. It's okay to acknowledge that you messed up. And you're then showing them how to resolve an issue, how to recover from an emotional outburst with grace. You're showing them that it's okay to apologize. So something that I do, because I apologize often to my kids. I'm imperfect. I lose my cool. But whenever I apologize to my kids for something that I've done, I always make it a point to first only talk about my behavior. I'm only acknowledging what I did wrong. There is no, I'm sorry, I wouldn't have done that if you hadn't done this. Their behavior, whatever they did wrong, if they did something wrong, that's a discussion that can be had at a different time. The apology, whenever you apologize to your kids, I want you to only acknowledge what you did wrong. And what I always do is I stress to my children, I'm sorry that whatever I did, I'm sorry that I yelled. I started feeling really stressed out. I started feeling really frustrated. So I tell them what I did wrong, what I was feeling, and then I tell them, you don't deserve that. You did not deserve to be yelled at. You didn't deserve to be hit, whatever the case may be. And I stress this a lot to my children, this notion that you do not deserve to be disrespected ever, even by me, especially by me. And I do that because whenever my children are older and they start having friendships, relationships, girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever it is, I want them to know so fundamentally that they deserve to be respected because they have been respected by me, that the first time somebody crosses a boundary with them, it sends every alarm bell off and they have no question whether they deserved it or not. They know that they deserve better. That's kind of the foundation that I try to lay for them, and that's why I think apologies and changed behavior is so important. It's so fundamental. The relationship that you have with your children is going to influence the relationships that they have with other people. And it's so important. This is how cycles repeat, right? Like, this is why we're doing this work, to heal generations of shitty parenting and trauma and whatever we individually have going on, right? It's so important. And the fact that you're here watching this video says tons about you. It says that you're willing to do the work, that you want to do the work. You're listening to this podcast because you're willing to acknowledge that you're imperfect, and you're also okay with being imperfect because you know that perfection is a lie, and that's okay too. So, quick recap, 3 questions to ask yourself when you lose your cool with your children. What am I really feeling? How can I honor this feeling? How can I maybe help prevent that outburst again in the future? Again, these are things that I don't want you to start thinking about in the moment. These are reflective exercises, things to meditate over. I hope that it helps you. I hope that it gives you some things to think about maybe. And above all, I hope that you remember when you lose your cool, it doesn't make you a bad mom. You're fine. You're so good. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you for watching, and please share it with somebody if you happen to like anything in here.